Hello students. Today we're going to start chapter 8, the nervous system. And today's lecture is going to be focused on the general structure of the nervous system and the types of cells of the nervous system. First thing we want to talk about is, what does the nervous system do? It generally receives information, processes it through our body, and then tells our body how to react. So it controls the activities of our body. Now there's two basic parts to the nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral meaning around, the peripheral nervous system consists of all the nerves that branch away from the brain and the spinal cord. So all the accessory nerves are the peripheral, meaning they surround the brain and spinal cord. Now, I'm going to step away for a second so I can show you a short video on this.
Various kinds of messages to and from the different parts of your body. The nervous system is composed of nerve fibers that conduct information into your spinal cord and brain, and the other nerve fibers that send information out to different parts of your body. The cells that make up the various parts of the nervous system are called neurons. Each neuron has a neuron body, a part of the cell which contains a nucleus and other structures. But a typical neuron has two other kinds of structures. Long fibers that extend in different directions from the body of the cell. These fibers are often wrapped with a fatty substance called myelin. Fibers that carry impulses toward the neuron body are called dendrites. Fibers that carry impulses away are called axons. Different structures are concentrated in different parts of the body. Some neuron bodies are bound into clusters called ganglia. They are often associated with your spinal cord. The spinal cord is a long cylinder of nerve tissue that passes through the hollow channels of bones called the vertebrae. The spinal cord is protected by those vertebrae. It is also protected by three membranes called meninges.
Okay, so we see a general overview of the nervous system. Now let's go ahead and talk about the types of cells that we find in our nervous system. The first one that you may already be familiar with is called a neuron, and that's the picture we're showing here. This whole structure is the neuron. The second type of cell is a glial cell, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. Now, neurons are responsible for what we talked about before, to actually carry the information to or away from the central nervous system. The first type of neuron is called afferent. Okay? That means that the information is taken to the central nervous system, to the brain and spinal cord. Efferent, E for what's the effect of this going to be? Efferent takes the information back away from the central nervous system. Now let me show you what I mean by that. Okay. Let's pretend like this is a really hot cup of coffee. Okay? I'm going to stick my finger in it. Immediately, the nerves that start at my fingertips are going to be the afferent nerves. They're going to take the information, travel up my fingertip, up my arm, to my spinal cord, up to my brain. And send my brain's going to process that information and then send a signal back telling my finger, what should you do about that hot coffee? Now the efferent neurons are going to take over. They're going to take that information that's been processed. Now they're going to send a signal back through my brain and spinal cord to my arm, to the tip of my fingertip, and it's going to say, take that finger out of that hot coffee right now. That's the difference between afferent and efferent. Now the cell itself has a unique structure. It has the basic organelles that we've talked about before in the cell body right here. It has a nucleus, cytoplasm, some of the other organelles we've talked about. And that cell body is called the soma. Okay. But it also has some other features. And if you remember when we looked at the cells under the microscope, you may have seen these extensions and wondered what they were. Well, first of all, we have dendrites. The dendrites stick straight off of the cell body. If you look at my hand as a neuron, okay, the middle of my hand is the cell body. My fingers would represent the dendrites. The dendrites bring information into the cell body from the surrounding cells. So dendrites bring the information in, goes through the cell body, and then the axon is this long structure here. The axon, using the same example, would be my arm, and the information would come from the dendrites to the cell body and down my arm. Axon carries the information away from the cell body, and it's either going to be then going to another cell or an effector, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now there's three different types of neurons. You have your sensory, interneuron, and your motor neuron. The sensory neuron, if we go back to my same example with my hot cup of coffee, the sensory neuron picks up the incoming information. It senses the outside world, the surrounding world, and it's going to bring the information back toward the CNS. But before that information goes to the CNS, it's probably going to go through another neuron called an interneuron. Because just think about the long channel of cells there has to be all the way from the tips of your fingers through your spinal cord and up to your brain. So an interneuron lies in between sensory and motor neurons. It's like a bridge in between, just to stretch it out to get the information from point A to point B. And then finally the motor neuron, the efferent neuron, is going to take the information back away from the brain towards my fingertip and tell it, take your finger out of the hot coffee. And let me get a book here, and I'm going to show you a picture of what that channel looks like. Let me try to get this closer. Hopefully you can see this. This would be my finger, and the information would be coming in here in the sensory neuron, the afferent neuron, passing through the central or interneuron, and passing through the brain, and then the efferent neuron is going to take the signal back to the muscle and tell it to remove my finger out of the hot coffee. One interesting thing I want to point out is in the motor neurons is something called Botox. Now, you may have heard a lot of the movie stars in Hollywood especially get Botox injections. So the women, instead of having regular lips, they might look like this. They like to have big plump lips in Hollywood. They also get the Botox injected up here in the lines of the forehead, and it helps the wrinkles not show up so much. It plumps it up. But what it does is, in effect, it paralyzes the motor neurons in that area. So that's why you may have heard jokes about people that have had Botox injection always look surprised, because their forehead is paralyzed. So here they are, happy, sad, tired, sleepy. They can feel because their sensory neurons are still working, but they can't react because their motor neurons are paralyzed. Botox comes from a form of botulism, if you've learned about that before, a horrible paralyzing disease. So that's what you're getting if you sign up for Botox. Another unique factor about neurons is, unlike other cells that go through mitosis like we've learned about, neurons for the most part are all done growing in our body by age 2. or not growing in our body, but as far as in numbers growing in our body. By the age of 2, you're going to have all the neurons you're ever going to have. This is why people can become paralyzed. In injuries, especially spinal cord injuries and other type of nerve injuries, if the cell body dies, that cell cannot grow, it cannot regenerate, or if the nucleus in particular dies, that cell is done and there's not going to be any other nerve cells to replace it. Now, if just the axon gets damaged, there is a chance that it can mend and become workable again, and that's where people have temporary paralysis. But if the nucleus is dead, that neuron is paralyzed because they do not go through mitosis and regenerate. Now, the last type of cell I want to talk about is the glial cell. We've already covered the type of neurons, and the neurons are the cells that carry the impulses. Glial cells just provide support and they facilitate signals, but they don't have any signaling ability. If you look here at the diagram, this yellow substance along the axon is cell bodies of the glial cells. They're membranes. So they wrap their cell membranes around the axons, and that's kind of an insulating subject. And the way it helps to speed up signals is like this. Let me show an example. If this is a regular axon coming off of a cell, a neuron, and this car represents the signal traveling down the axon. Okay, so it has to travel all the way down that axon before it gets to the end and to the next cell. Well, if the axon is wrapped in glial cells, we'll say that these are the glial cell membranes, that car can jump, or that signal can jump in between all the glial cells, travels and can jump over, travels and jump over, and that makes the signal go much faster down the axon. The axons are actually, the glial cells are actually composed of a really fat-rich substance called myelin. And the myelin is a really white in color, and that's where we get the term white matter. You've probably already learned about white matter versus gray matter in brain tissue. And that's because the white matter, what you're actually seeing are the myelinated axons. The myelin is white. So the white matter consists of axons, and the gray matter is mostly the cell bodies. And one important disease that I want to mention here is multiple sclerosis. You may have heard of this, and it's a degenerative nervous system disease. But in particular, what happens at the cellular level is the myelin becomes dismantled, breaks apart, and the impulses can't travel properly. So that's the end of our lecture on the cells of the nervous system. Next lecture, we'll pick up on more of the functions of the nervous signal. Until then, this is Mrs. Toncray, signing off.